G'day. Welcome to the bitter truth about parti-gyles. Now be warned, this video is for the purist. Leave now if you want to avoid being transported back 50 years to South London and the delights of Young's beers from 1975. So there are some questions. What if you only wanted to recreate just the one beer from a parti-gyle? Parti-gyling tends to be confusing and complicated and needs more equipment, plus attention to detail in the blending process. I suspect for most brewers, a single gyle is much easier to deal with, but not all historical beer records detail a single gyle. Most were parti-gyles. So the question arises, how do you deconstruct a parti-gyle into individual beers? There would be a lot of redundant calculations, yes, maths, necessary to determine the correct blend. Now, a fundamental question, was a parti-gyle beer the same as a single-gyle beer of the same type? And can you just scale it? And does it matter anyway? Can you just use the total materials and adjust for the required OG? Why have we got all these questions? Well, the whole idea of parti-gyling frightens and intimidates some brewers. I think parti-gyling is a bit like decoction mashing. For most brewers, it's a thing to try once, just to see how you can make a range of beers from a single mash. But for brewers in England in the 20th century, it was a very efficient way to get the most out of the goods in the mash tun, even down to the last runnings of 1.004, and produce a range of beers at different gravities and price points. In my case, out of 447 batches, I have done precisely 5 parti-gyles. The most successful was Murphy's Stout, where a smaller amount of XXX Stout was produced with a weaker porter. Anyway, my aim here is to show how to extract a single beer from a parti-gyle based from an original source brewing record. Now, my book Parti-Gyle Brews has many examples of parti-gyles, and the link to buy is in the description below. And I covered designing parti-gyle brews using Brewfather in an earlier video, and that's also linked below. This is an extract from that process. As you can see, there's a lot of calculations to be done. Now, what if you get rid of all of those calculations and then use the Parti-Gyle Analyser from a Python program that will just let you take the base data, output a 24-liter batch, which you just enter into Brewfather once. So the video uses a work parti-gyle example of an actual brew from a Young's 1975 brewing book, deconstructed to produce single gyles. And thanks to Ron Pattinson for the data. So I'll cover the key definitions, decipher the recipe details, and the process of making this recipe extraction came from AI. Gemini produced a Python program based on my inputs, and that became the Parti-Gyle Analyser. Then I wrap up with some analysis. So just to go through the definitions. So a parti-gyle is a method of producing multiple gyles, batches or beers from one match. And for the people that need to get with the program, copper equals kettle, kettle equals copper, because most coppers were actually copper. at one stage. So we have archaic measurements. We're in imperial barrel territory here in the UK. So it's 36 imperial gallons. And the typical gravity measurement was pounds per barrel or brewer's pounds. And that shows how you can do the conversion. And we have volumetric measurements. We have quarters, bushels, 8 bushels to a quarter, and the weight of a bushel varies dependent on what's being weighed. So custom and practice, the brewers knew what sort of weight they were getting from a volumetric measure. Occasionally you get in the brewing book what the actual weights were, but that's very rare. So for these calculations, a quarter of base malt has been taken nominally as 336 pounds, and 100 weight is not 100, it's 112. So I used a spreadsheet calculator, which I do have available online to do my conversions. It just makes things a lot easier. And I've treated the ABV calculation from the UK excise requirements. Now, IBUs. So it's very imprecise, but it's widely used. I've used Tinseth throughout, mostly because that's what I've been consistently using for the last 20 plus years. However, we do need to consider that alpha acids decay over time based on storage temperature. And there's a whole range of other issues. There's seeded hops, lower brewing value. There's poorer isomerization in higher gravity worts, and boil duration is a factor. Hop stand utilization temperature and time varies, as does whatever form factor of hop you're using, whether you're using whole leaf or T90 pellets. And when looking at the IBU numbers, just bear in mind that perhaps plus minus 5 IBU is considered a sensory threshold to notice a difference. So just take that into account. So now we're going to go through the typical 20th century Parti-Gyle. This is Young's plant, and as you can see on the right, there is a copper from the Young's Museum in Wandsworth. So what they did, they boiled a first copper, then a second copper, and then when they'd emptied the first copper, they used the first copper again for the third copper. Then the outputs of these coppers were blended into 3 fermentation vessels to make 2 different beers. Now the beers we're going to cover today are Special and Young's Bitter. So the data is there. Notably, the Special had a note at the bottom of the log that color was added at racking. And we do need just to put not quite sure whether they made any racking room adjustments. And what I'm talking about here is adding in return beer, which may have changed the final gravity and the alcohol content. Then there was a strange thing called YPV in the book. And YPV turned out to be yeast propagation vessel. So not only did they make 2 different beers, they also provided 1040 wort to feed their yeast propagation system. So these are the materials for the full brew to produce both of those beers. Now ABM, Associated British Maltsters and Crisp, and all the data that I've managed to gather is that was Maris Otter from 2 different sources. The flakes were actually torrefied barley. Dixon's enzymic malt. I mean, what we're talking about here is that's acid malt. So just adjust your mashing water instead. For the conversion, I simply added the enzyme malt to the base malt. And then we've got invert sugar added to the copper. Now I have a separate video on making invert sugar, and again the link is below. Hop-wise, no identification of type. So I have assumed Fuggles and Goldings. What was interesting here was there was an addition to the hop back. And as you can see, different quantities of hops were used in each copper, probably in some proportion towards the gravities of each copper. So it was a single infusion mash. First mash around 68C, and then they remashed it, and that went into the second and third coppers. So I've assumed that the invert and malt extract went into the copper at the start of boil, and that the copper hops were added at boil. I had a bit of a tic-tac with John Hatch via email, and whilst this is before his time, the conservatism of approach in this particular brewery probably means that that's fairly consistent. So the hop back, it acts to strain out the whole hops and seeds. It also produces bright wort as it collects all the trub. And a hop sparge was occasionally used, not in this instance, but it has been in some Parti-Gyle blends, where you rinse the hops in the hop back and you get a bit more gravity to add into your blend. And when we come to consider the hopping, the hop rate was 5.5 pounds per quarter, and the hops alphas were found on the Barclay Perkins website. I discounted that by 15% for seeds, which gave a Fuggle alpha of 3.7 and Goldings 4.2. I could have discounted the quantity, but I wanted to actually keep the same hopping rates throughout. So I've just reduced the alpha. So in the lower gravity wort in coppers 2 and 3, taken a standard inverted commas hop utilization, but a reduced utilization in copper 1 because of the higher gravity wort where the sugars were added. There's also an assumption there was no dry hopping in cask because the flavor hops were basically added in the hop back. Now, the analyzer. Now you need to go to GitHub. There's no two ways about it. If you want the analyzer and the files that make it all work, you have to go to GitHub. So I've got the link there. You then need to put them into a folder, and then you have a JSON input file, which I'm going to cover shortly, which is your data input. And then you click the bat file and follow the prompts, and you'll get some outputs. And the outputs are a JSON report, a text file, and a beer XML file. Now this is where there's no substitute for AI here. You're going to have to look at the brewing log and enter the data into the JSON. I use Notepad++. There are many different ways of doing that, but you do need to set your output requirements, single-gyle, what batch size, efficiency, hop form, etc. And then you convert all your data from your source document into pounds, choose the color and the potential extracts that you aim to get, and then for each copper enter the volumes, gravities, any malt substitutes like sugar used, wait color, potential, and the addition times. So you put in your hop alpha and your hop quantities and the timing. And then you add any other streams that might be used in blending, like treated liquor or hop sparge. Crucially, you need to pick a brewing log where the quantities of each stream used in the blend is actually listed. And just watch out for typos and errors in the historical document. These were documents produced by the brewers while they were brewing, and occasionally they make typos. So here's a few slides detailing how you edit the JSON file. So in here, you put in your batch size that you want. My system, that's the boil size in liters that I start off with. You need to put in your target efficiency. Now, the target efficiency here, the 72, is a brew house efficiency, not a mash efficiency. So it's set for my system. You'll need to set it for yours. So if I set the brew house efficiency at 72, I end up with a mash efficiency of 75, which suits me. Your mileage may vary. And then moving down the file, you then put in each of your weights, colors, and potential of each of your fermentables. I'll come back to the target efficiency in a moment. You get to the boil, and then you put in the boil time, the post volume boil, and this is the crucial one, volume available for blending, and the SG. So here's we've got the discounted utilization factor, and then you go through and you add in anything that you're going to put in the copper. And as you can see here, you've defined the hops. You've got boil time, you've got the form factor, and you put in for the at boil, and then the hop stand. And you repeat that for each copper. There's a facility to put in the auxiliary streams, so hop sparge or liquor. In this case, they didn't use hop sparge, they just used liquor. And then the blending matrix. Now, this is the heart of parti-gyling, how you do the blend. Now, bear in mind that this was calculated on the fly by the brewers of the day, and it was remarkably consistent, as we shall see. So we've got special 1045, pale ale, which is bitter 1036, pale ale 1036. Now, I had to tune the hop utilization, and as you can see, I put one slide here to go through exactly what you might get from hop stands, etc. Now, I used as a basis mostly a document from the Grainfather website, and it seems to be as best as I could determine the current feeling for what you might get. So I've gone with 90 degrees C for 30 minutes. The reason for 30 minutes, there is such a document called the Young's Bible, inverted commas, and in there it's stated that the hop back, the wort stayed in the hop back for 30 minutes. So that's my rationale for 30 minutes. And 90, well, if it's in there for come out the kettle, copper, yeah, probably. Now, if you decide to use a large language model like Gemini, I actually got it to tell me what it needed for me to supply it with something that it could create the program with. And these were the key words that I had to put in to get it to do what it does. So for what it's worth, that's the secret sauce. So now we move to the analyzer output. This is just a prettier picture of what comes out of the text file. The beer we're going to concentrate on is PA2, the bitter, which is the larger volume 455 barrels. The ABV figures are generated by the program, very much an approximation. They're not based on actual final gravity. And as I mentioned about the yeast propagation vessel, the wort had to be recorded for customs duty purposes, which is why it's in the brewing book. Now, in parallel with the development of the program, which was me asking the bot for various improvements and refinements as we went along, I also put the data into my trusty spreadsheet so that I could compare manually, using the old method, what the output of the PG analyzer was. So here you can see it was coming out at 1036-ish. Now what we got from the Parti-Gyle Analyser, we've got some boil IBUs, the hop stand IBUs and total IBUs, and as you can see, each copper has a different amount of IBUs. The EBC numbers came from the Moray formula. And then I added in the bittering rate only to just use that as a sanity check. Then I put it into my spreadsheet again and had a look at what IBUs should get in total. So from my table, I got 19.5 and the Parti-Gyle Analyser came out at 19.4. So I thought that was all right. Now, when you convert to the single-gyle, there's an efficiency adjustment needed because the Young's multi-mashing system of this period, the 90.5%, is not what you're going to get in your typical small system brewery. So the grain weights have been scaled up by 25%. That's just to compensate for the change in efficiencies between a large system and a small system. And after all that, here's the actual recipe for PA2, the Young's bitter. As you can see, it gives you all the relevant details. You've got the percentages of the fermentables, you've got the hopping rate in grams per litre, and the smaller batch calculated a slightly higher IBU figure. I've tested importing the generated beer XML file into Brewfather, and it definitely saves manually typing in the base data. You can then modify it to your own system settings and your inventory, etc. When I brewed the test version, I mashed at 66C for 75 minutes. I used hop pellets adjusted for the alpha that I had. I use Lallemand House Ale, which is a dry yeast. I think you probably need 2 packets unless you're repitching like I did. Adjust your water profile to suit. The brewing book showed the use of liquid gypsum. I suggest a 2-to-1 sulfate to chloride ratio for the bitter, and there was a note in the log that the pH was 4.25 at racking. So the Parti-Gyle Analyser came out when it converted to the 24 litre batch to a higher IBU rate than comparing the big batch. Putting the same data manually into a Brewfather recipe, it's neither here nor there. It's 22.2 to 22, so it's a very close match. The same data of the base malts and extracts. I mean, what we have here basically is it's almost perfect. Now, for completeness, we need to cover off the fermentation, otherwise you won't be able to have a decent crack at brewing this. So there's a picture of that I took in 2006. Unbeknownst at the time, I did the brewery visit just before the brewery actually closed, but you can see the attemperating coils in the fermentation vessel. So it's pitched at 16, and they use dropping. So it was dropped to the square, and then they skimmed it several times. And as you can see, it's pretty much done in 48 hours, 2 days. Then they conditioned it for 4 days at 13C, racked after 7 days. The figures from the brewing book are probably as racked, so that gives us the ABVs. There were a couple of notes that they were using an adjunct added with isinglass at racking. I suggest Biofine Clear or an equivalent to that is the way to go. Now, I did mention that I'd assumed there was no dry hopping, but the Bible from 1965 rather showed that they were dry hopped at 4 ounce per barrel. It's unclear whether they were still putting hops in the hopback at that stage. So using the Parti-Gyle Analyser, here's some side-by-side comparisons for the Parti-Gyle and some single-gyle brews from about the same time. With the Parti-Gyle, the only thing really that was of note was the special, because of it's using more of copper 1, had a bit more number 3 invert and a bit more malt extract. But the rest of the numbers were remarkably consistent. So if we look at a single gyle for pale ale, and you can see that it's almost identical to the Parti-Gyle PA1. And if we also look at another batch, which was made up of special, the special, little bit more bitterness, but very adjacent to the Parti-Gyle special. So what do we make of all this? So was a Parti-Gyle bitter the same as a single-gyle bitter? Well, yes, and also true for special. Can you just use the total materials and just adjust for the OGs? Well, yes, in this instance. However, this might not hold true elsewhere or in a different era. Will the bittering be appropriate taking this approach? Probably not. There are different hopping rates in each copper and the hopback, and these are apportioned in the blend. So it will be different from just using a scaled approach of a single gyle. Was the use of Gemini AI a help or a hindrance? Well, I couldn't have done it without it. It's a bit annoying, and occasionally it's got the propensity to make things up, especially when it gets a trickier question and it's trying to help, but I certainly couldn't have done it without it. You now have a relatively simple tool, the Parti-Gyle Analyser, to extract a beer from the Parti-Gyle that you can adapt for your system. It's a bit hit and miss importing a beer XML file. The standard is somewhat dated and limited in its scope. I used it through the Brewfather import and it worked as expected. And I only tested the Parti-Gyle Analyser on a small sample size from Young's, Ram Brewery, in April 1975. Your mileage may vary. Cheers. Here's some references. Thanks again to John Hatch and Ron Pattinson. Thanks for watching. If you've got this far, well done. Hit subscribe to be notified of more recreation tips. All the links are below. And if you like this, my books are available print on demand from Lulu. Cheers.